Good afternoon to all of you, our loyal and dear viewers and participants in this JCPA daily wartime diplomacy broadcast and briefing. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I'm sitting here with my esteemed colleague and longtime friend, Khaled Toameh, a senior member, senior scholar at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And today we are honored to welcome two of perhaps the greatest military thinkers in Europe and in the state of Israel, Colonel Richard Kemp to my right and to your left, a senior commander in the British Armed Forces. He was the senior commander in the war in Afghanistan, and also General Uzi Dayan, Major General Uzi Dayan, who was the deputy chief of staff and former national security advisor under two prime ministers, Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, one of our great strategic thinkers, fellow of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, both gentlemen. And this is really a treat for us, to say the least, because we stand at a critical moment in terms of where Israel is in its counterterror war against the Iranian regime mobilized Hamas organization. This is day 131 of a very difficult war, but the Israeli Defense Forces has been making substantial progress in chasing down the Hamas leadership, including Yahya Sinwar, whom all the papers today have reported on the documentation of his running, escaping or trying to escape on October the 10th, just some 4 months ago, after the October 7th massacre, through the tunnels with children around him to defend him, as has been just one example of the massive human rights violations that the Hamas has undertaken, not to mention the massacre, torture, a mass rape itself of Israeli citizens and other nationals on October the 7th. Here, Israel stands to make a push into the Rafah region, which is bordering the Philadelphia route, Philadelphia corridor, as it's called, which separates Egypt and Israel, that have a long-standing peace treaty between them, great sensitivities, great dangers for Hamas battalions understood to be in Rafah. And the question that we will discuss right now with our two illustrious senior commanders is, what are the major challenges for Israel in pushing through and conquering Rafah, and trying to identify and save additional of the 134 hostages still held by the Hamas, and at the same time maintaining security and sensitivity opposite Israel's important ally and peace partner, which is the Republic of Egypt. So, gentlemen, great to have you. Khaled, great to have you here on the show. We did a podcast earlier today. I get 2 times with Khaled in one day. How great. Colonel Kemp, great to have you in Israel again. And I'm glad to say it's not the first time in the last year, but you've been here frequently advising us informally, and also picking up other consultations from our senior officers and security officials. You're just come back from Gaza, and you were in Khan Yunis. What is your sense about how Israel is doing, how the IDF is doing right now in Khan Yunis? We'd call it arachat matzav, is the situational a brief from your point of view, and what are the dangers and challenges, constraints going into Rafah before we go to General Dayan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan. I've been inside Gaza a few times since the ground war began, and therefore I've seen with my own eyes, as well as studying it from externally, the complexities of this battlefield. And I think it would be fair to say that this battlefield in Gaza is probably the most challenging battlefield that any soldiers have ever had to fight on. Most treacherous, the most complex. I don't say it's the most intense, because of course we think of battles like Stalingrad and even Bakhmut. I was in Bakhmut myself just before this war began here in Ukraine. And I observed the fighting taking place in Bakhmut, and there was far simpler, I mean, much more intense, much higher casualty rates, enemy artillery, tanks, all the rest of it, air threats, which don't exist inside Gaza. But much more straightforward when you've got two armies fighting each other. In this case, you've got a battleground that's been prepared over years by Hamas. You've got the immense difficulties of fighting in an urban environment, which I think any soldier will tell you is the most difficult terrain to fight on. You've then got the tunnel network beneath Gaza. You've got the hostages on top of that. And then the final complexity is you've got the spotlight of the world on you. And in the campaigns I fought in, there was never any kind of intensity of observation as exists today inside Gaza, which adds problems of their own. Now, taking into account all of that, I think Israel's done remarkably well so far, from what I can see and from what I can understand. And not only have they managed to eliminate, according to IDF figures, which we have no reason not to believe are the best estimate they can provide, they managed to eliminate around 10,000 Hamas terrorists in Gaza, and probably to incapacitate by wounding another 10,000, which roughly equals between 50 and probably 60, 70% of Hamas's overall strength. That has led to, I think, a breakdown of Hamas as a unified entity. We understand that the Hamas commanders, Sinwar, Deif, and the others, the top-level commanders, are no longer able to communicate with their units on the ground, though such as it still exist. And they have essentially they're focusing, as you mentioned in this video from a while back, but today they're focusing, I think, primarily on their own survival. And you've got fragmented units. You've got very, apart from perhaps now in Rafah, you've got very few, I think, coherent units as were originally organized. And I think there does come a point when once a military organization, if you could call Hamas a military organization, a terror army, once it goes beyond a certain extent of degradation, it begins to collapse. And I think we will see that. And set against that is the casualties on the Israeli side, which, tragic though every single Israeli soldier's death is, there have only been 230. Now, only is a terrible thing to say, because for every family and every soldier involved, it's a disaster. But nevertheless, I think it's far fewer casualties than the IDF anticipated at this stage of the fighting. And then you look at civilian casualties, and you alluded to this at the beginning when you said that the ratio of civilian to combatant casualties seems to be far lower than in pretty much every other equivalent campaign that's been fought since the Second World War. The ratio, roughly speaking, I think now is about 1.5, 1.3 civilians to every combatant. Sounds bad, is bad, but nevertheless, if you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, it was something like 3 to 5 civilians killed for every combatant, and in other conflicts much higher. So I think that's broadly speaking, that's my estimate of the event so far. Perhaps I'm conscious I've been talking for too long. Perhaps
not at all.
We could hear from General Dayan about what his appreciation of the complexities of going into Rafah.
General Dayan, I want to pick up from what Colonel Kemp has said here and turn to you and ask, what are the complexities of moving into Rafah, and why has this been sort of the last front to be conquered? There are arguments that it should have been the first front conquered, because the Philadelphia corridor is really symbolically and physically the indication of Israeli de facto military control, or a major part of it, of the Strip.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard. You know, when our friends in different places of the world tell us that all our efforts, we are not enough money, are not enough, you know, to treat the terrorists as human beings, we usually bring Richard and ask what does he think about it, and then we get a kind of a rational angle about the events. So thank you, and I'll go right to look, I'm bringing here my experience. I was also the parliament member in Israel, a member of the Knesset in Israel twice, and I was the head of all the security committees in all the negotiations of Israel with the Palestinians, with the Syrians, with the Jordanians, and actually with others that we didn't expose so far. And I spent many years fighting terrorism and at the same time trying to find a solution. And what I understood more than everything, that we deal all the time with our moral dilemmas. And when I talk to, I don't know, to the Hamas or other people, they just don't understand what is the problem. Because we said we have a problem or dilemma, we try, I even told them once, the people of the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, I said, you know, we are not, we don't have problems, we have challenges. I'm a Stanford graduate, not Harvard, but this was taken to the best of my memory from Harvard. We don't have problems, we have challenges. And they didn't ask me what are your challenges. They just say, what is the problem? What is the dilemma? And so we have to understand that first of all. And let me give another example. Israel always there is a lot of talking here vis-a-vis Rafah and the border of Philadelphia. We were talking, can we cease the fire for, I don't know, 1 week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and try to bring back at least some of our, of the hostages that the Hamas kidnapped. And I never saw such a hesitation in the terror organizations, because there is a formula in the Middle East. When we declare ceasefire, we seize and they fire. And they don't have any dilemma about it. They just said, okay, say you promise, say, so what? So at the beginning, it's unbalanced situation, but we are a democratic Jewish state, etc. So we have to deal with it. I think that here the solution meet the operational solution meet the how to solve the solution of the dilemma. Because in order to succeed in taking over Rafah and the new Israeli-Egyptian border, we have to do our best to separate the civilians, or so-called civilians, because some of them are terrorists without weapons, and the terrorists who are still continue to fight. If we do it in the right way, the outcomes, the results are good, it's much easier. Because fighting terrorists, we know how to do it. And separating their human shields is something that is very positive. It contributes a lot actually to solving or to winning this battle. And we're in Rafah about the last battle in this war in Gaza Strip. So this is what should be done. And this is what we are trying. By the way, we can have another extra payment or achievement by doing that, because we can screen the people who are going to the humanitarian areas, etc., and pick there and arrest or detain the relatives in the very basic family of the terror organization's commanders. I think that doing that will give us some cards about trying to solve and to bring back all the hostages. We started to do it. It has to be done in a larger scale. And I think that this is what should be done in Gaza. I mean, in the Gaza Strip, about this, maybe the last battle of this war in Rafah and along the Egyptian border.
To both gentlemen, one of the major concerns that the Egyptians have voiced is that this type of major battle against 4 brigades, which is a substantial force that Israel would be confronting, could possibly trigger a major civilian influx across the border, or an attempt to go across the border. How do you deal with the very sensitive issue of a long-standing peace partner and ally called Egypt, which is arguably Israel's most important ally in terms of the security sense and the long-standing agreement we've had with them? How do you answer these types of serious concerns that are being voiced, and the risks are really there? I mean, you've got a major risk. Khaled, what's your sense? You've got a major risk of thousands and thousands of Palestinian Gazans being displaced and not knowing really where to go.
First of all, Dan, we have to be very careful when we talk about figures and statistics. I've been reading reports that there are 1.4 million Palestinians in the Rafah area. I have many doubts about this number. I think it's being exaggerated in order to deter Israel from entering, and most of these reports are coming from Hamas-affiliated sources. So we need to be very careful. I mean, Rafah has a city of 200,000 people, and I just don't see how we can fit another 1 million or 1.2 million people over there. So, with regards to that, I'd be very careful. Now, of course, the Egyptians have their fears and their concerns, and they've always had. And what we are seeing right now is the Egyptians beefing up security on their border, deploying tanks and, trying to prevent any infiltration of Palestinians. I don't rule out the possibility that we could see thousands of Palestinians rush towards the border with Egypt once the Israeli invasion starts in the Rafah area. I mean, I don't see any other realistic solution right now for removing the 4 battalions of Hamas that are there. As long as they are there and you don't remove them, you haven't actually achieved anything. The whole war will be, pointless as long as there are 4 or even 1 battalion of Hamas. So this is a dilemma that is facing Israel, and it's also, the Egyptians are also very worried. Let's see how it plays out.
I think the Egyptians are, like many of the Arab countries who are speaking about this conflict, they're saying one thing publicly and they're speaking slightly differently in private. And I think, there's been talk of how the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel is going to be cancelled if Israel invades Rafah. I don't think that's a realistic proposition.
They denied it, by the way.
Yeah.
The Egyptians denied it.
Right, but clearly they're deeply concerned. I mean, they do have an obligation to take refugees in these circumstances into Egypt, but I can understand entirely why they wouldn't want to do that. But I believe today there's been some discussion of an agreement between Israel and Egypt for Egypt itself to set up a refugee camp on the coast, I think it is, about 300,000 plus, to take about 300,000 plus refugees, which Egypt has not said they will do, but they haven't rejected it either. So that could be a potential option to avoid this situation where Egypt risks getting its border overrun.
Mm-hmm. General Dayan, what are the major operational challenges as you see them of being in Rafah, and how long can such an operation last?
Well, right now, if we want to separate the citizens, the residents of Gaza and Rafah and all the people that just accumulated there in Rafah, I don't think that is 1.2 million people, but let's take this number. The best solution is that the Egyptians will get them for certain time, open a kind of a big area with camps, and keep them there until they can return to Gaza. The Egyptians don't want to do it. Why they don't want to do it? I first of all remind all of us that we wanted to give Rafah to the Egyptians in the agreement. When we made an agreement with Egypt, we said, take Rafah and we won't charge you for that. I mean, we want something else or a piece of land for it. And they refused. They refused to do it and said, no, let's go according to the 1917 line, the British line. And I remember that even I said to them, Lacharam, isn't a pity about the people there that you just cut Rafah into two half? And they said, this is min Allah, this is a God will in a way. And they didn't want, because they didn't want to rule. When they ruled Gaza from until 1967, they didn't even give them a citizenship. They didn't have a citizenship. All the people in Gaza, they had a laissez-passer. They don't have an Egyptian citizenship even. And by the time, they don't want to rule Gaza, but from what I see, they like the idea that the Hamas is there, because this is pose a problem to Israel. They don't want the Hamas to get together with the Islamic brothers in Egypt, but in the same time, they want them to be, you know, to be occupied, to deal with Israel and fight Israel. So this is why they don't want us to be on the border, on the new border, on the border of Egypt with Gaza Strip. So if they don't want to do it, there is no way to force them to do it. And if we will force the Palestinians to go there, I mean the people of Gaza and Rafah to go over the border, the Egyptian, that will be a massacre. And by the way, the Egyptian won't feel that they have a dilemma about it. They will just say it's Israel's fault. If they don't do it, we will have to do it. This is something we are not really thrilled and happy to do it, but we need to do it if we want to win this battle on Rafah. And that the Egyptians have a chutzpah to say, we don't want you to force them to go to other place which is under our occupation, and it's your problem. So this is a pure chutzpah. What we have to do in such a situation is to do it and say to the Egyptians, if you don't help, at least don't interfere in it, and do it from our part until the border. We have to go until the border. If not, there will be a big problem that, just a minute, I'm sorry. They have a big if we don't do it, the Hamas will come again through these passages in Rafah. And this is the way they did it so far. Some of it because with the Egyptian help, some of that because the Egyptians turned their eyes or they didn't pay attention to it. And some of them because they bribed the Bedouins and the Egyptians officers, etc. This is how the Hamas become so strong in Gaza. The Egyptians helped them, or it was through the Egyptian Hamas border, and we are not going to let it happen again.
Both Uzi and Richard, we face a new day in terms of the dangers, threats, and challenges to Israel's national security concept, which has always been based on deterrence, early warning, and then offensive victory. I mean, total victory. Now, because Israel does not have borders that are passively or actively defensible right now between Israel's southern border and Gaza, Israel's northern border and Lebanon and Syria, notwithstanding the long, decades-old concept of defensible borders that had been developed by General Yigal Allon regarding the hills of the West Bank and the necessity of keeping the Jordan Valley as Uzi, you take many decision makers and foreign officers as well and government leaders on a tour to see what the iron wall is in Judea and Samaria that form our defensible border there. But what does Israel do now in terms of developing defensible borders into the north and to the south?
Well, right now, the first step is to win this war. Winning the war in Gaza and eliminating the Hamas will serve very much the Israeli deterrence that was very much lost, actually, in the last years, especially the 7th of October. So we have to beat the Hamas. Just want to teach a terror organization a lesson. And by the way, the only way to even to deter terror organization is to threat its own existence. On existence, I mean to eliminate all the leadership and kick him out of his territory, of its territory. In that, in this example, Gaza Strip. So this is the first step. The second one, we need, it's not enough to be on the border because you will be surprised again and again, and some of it because we weren't good enough. And by the time we lost the terms, and we weren't good enough in actually protecting our people, our settlements along the border. It's true in the northern arena, it's true in Gaza, and it didn't put into a real challenge, a real test in the other places. What should be done there? It's first of all to give them much more power. I mean, the people who are there along the borders, which means that every settlement, every kibbutz, every village should have its own forces. We do to have a regional force to help them, and very important, it's not enough to sit or to cultivate your fields, etc., to the fence, and say from the fence and to the other side of the enemy, the deterrence or our defense will work. We have to start thinking and implementing, well, what the Americans called once death zone. I don't know, like the fence, or for example, the border between South and North Korea, which means that we have to have a kind of a belt, which are, if you enter there, Israel can, we can open a fire, and not as we did in Gaza, that we let people from Gaza to arrive to the fence because of what was in Israel, the Supreme Court, and said maybe he's innocent, maybe he's deranged, maybe we don't know, etc., etc. So the borders, if you don't have a border with a country, but you have a border with a terror country, terror state, and so like Lebanon, like in Gaza, you have to implement and to, or not only to deploy your forces between the settlers and I say settlers all around Israel. I don't call the settlers only on the West Bank. Between the your settlements and the enemy, there should be the army, the Israeli, the IDF should be deployed, and in top of it, or in plus it, you have to have a kind of a belt, a distance in which you don't let you let nobody to enter to this death zone.
You think it's Richard? Do you think the viability of what General Dayan is talking about rings true for you? Is there an argument to say that Israel has to have substantial permanent forces, a moat, 5 or 6 or 8 kilometers, building a buffer inside Gaza, notwithstanding the political threats of our Western allies, if we were to do that?
I think there's no question that however they do it in detail, the IDF must maintain overall security control in Gaza for the foreseeable future, probably forever, but certainly for the foreseeable future. How exactly that is managed?
Richard, at least for 3 years.
Yeah.
Why? Because we have to kick out UNRWA. UNRWA, it's a kind of a terror organization, and it's do the best of of what they can or want to do is to continue the war of 48 hours. Every year, more and more refugees. And we started with 700,000, and we are now 6.1 million refugees. So you are completely right. In the long run, we don't want to be in Lebanon, or we don't want to be in Jordan, but we have to, you have to settle to make a kind of let's call it security zone or security belt. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I whether it's 3 years or whether it's 100 years, I don't know the answer to that. But I think certainly in the immediate future, the IDF has got to maintain security control over the entirety of the Gaza Strip, including by buffer zones, fire breaks, however you want to describe it. I think another point I would make that kind of in support of what the general said earlier is this issue of deterrence. And I believe that one of the main reasons, perhaps the main reason why Hizbullah has not acted even more aggressively than it already has, and things are heating up now as we speak, I think, up in the north. But I believe they've watched what the IDF has been doing to Hamas, and they don't want the same thing done to them. And that's another reason why it's so important that Israel completes the destruction of Hamas in Gaza and does go into Rafah. There are many reasons for it, but that's another very important reason. And a couple of other brief points I'd like to make. I agree entirely that there needs to be a strengthening of whatever you call it, its local security forces, militias, etc. Also a significant increase in size to the IDF. And I would say also, and this has already begun, I believe, but I think one thing that's very important, the lesson that's come out of this, shouldn't have had to be learned here, is the need for Israel to become less dependent on anybody else in terms of its munitions, in particular, and its weaponry. Right now, Israel is dependent on the US. Let's hope the US continues to support what Israel's doing, but it needs to break away from that dependency.
Manufacture its own weapons, right, its own ammunition
in a much greater scale. And in the same way as you mentioned earlier, that the political situation is changing in the US as the levels of support for Israel, particularly among the younger generation, is only going to get worse, I think, and Israel needs to be self-dependent. And the final point is all of this may be aided in the longer term as the Abraham Accords develop. And it's not just the Abraham Accords to enable Israel and the Arab countries to work more closely together and therefore isolate those people who have an aggressive intent towards Israel, including Iran and Palestinians, etc. But also to the information world. The information game is very important as well, because a lot of the problems we're seeing over this conflict, maybe they're peripheral problems, but could become more important, is the way the West regards Israel and the way the West, I'm talking about European countries, the US to some extent, the way that they kind of automatically assume Israel is in the wrong. Okay, they've been strong support, but nevertheless, there is this agenda, that this narrative that exists, very strong one, which I think needs to be, if it can be, it has to be dislodged.
There's another question I want to raise to Khaled, picking up on your point about information and communications policy towards the Arab East, not only towards the Judeo-Christian democratic West, in the sense that there is a large question that people are asking in Israel and in the West: what's going to happen the day after Hamas, whatever that means? Does that mean the day after Sinwar? Does that mean the day after, the majority of these 4 battalions are defeated? We don't really know what that really means the day after, but let's assume that the vast majority of Hamas political and military commanders are defeated, and you then have a vacuum of power in the Gaza Strip regarding the day-to-day administrative operations. Khaled, you've been doing some thinking about this. What is realistic to consider? Is it realistic to consider that the local, what are known in Arabic as hamulot, local families, local clans are able to administer the different municipalities and cities within the Gaza Strip, even if Israel is there with overall security responsibility?
First of all, Dan, we did see in the past that when Israel was there were Palestinians who were working with Israel. We forget that until 1993, Israel was fully in control of the Gaza Strip. Israel had a military government. Israel had a civil administration. And Palestinians did not boycott it. They did not say we are not going to work with Israel. Now, fast forward to now. A lot depends on how this war ends. As long as Palestinians have the feeling or see that Hamas is not destroyed and Hamas is still there, they're not going to cooperate with Israel. And as long as they see Israel's military operation as a temporary operation and not as a long-term operation, 3, 4, 5 years, you won't see Palestinians stepping up and saying, okay, we want to take over. That's why Israel has to complete the job of destroying Hamas in order to embolden other Palestinians and perhaps other Arabs also to get involved. No Arab, no Palestinian will come and assume control over Gaza when he knows that there are 10 Hamas terrorists out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just
please
make
go.
a point on that from Afghanistan, which is not without its parallels. The West, in its fighting in Afghanistan, Western armies focused a hell of a lot on hearts and minds of the people, being nice to the people, building them schools, all the good stuff. But that wasn't of great interest to them. Of course, they appreciated it, but what was of interest to them was which is the stronger army. Is the US army or the British army the stronger, or is the Taliban the stronger? And they wanted to obviously be on the side of the one that was going to stay longest and be strongest. And that, I think, worked very much in favor of the Taliban and against our kind of westernized concept of hearts and minds.
Yes, absolutely. And we're actually going to be doing a couple of major initiatives and campaigns, research policy initiatives and diplomatic campaigns, and as well as communication campaigns. We would invite and even ask our loyal participants to help us fund these campaigns. Major General Dayan is going to be co-heading one of these campaigns on developing the defensible border security concept for Israel. And Colonel Kemp will be involved in that. And we really need your help. You can earmark your support for the Defensible Borders campaign, national security concept, and you will be prominently listed there as a partner in that campaign. We would deeply appreciate your support for that. You can actually do that right on the site under JGive. Any gift is blessed. We would ask as a basic founder's gift of $500 if you were prepared to do that. And that would be a major initiative coming out of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs with these two esteemed senior commanders and tremendous military planners. Gentlemen, your final comments on where we are today on the eve of making a push into Rafah. It does seem the United States, according to what we're hearing, does not oppose, according to Ambassador Herzog in Washington, reporting this morning, he sees the Americans are not opposing an Israeli military push into Rafah to finish the job. General Dayan, your final thoughts and observations.
No, first of all, I think that before talking about the day after, we should bring the day after. The only way to bring the day after is to take over Gaza Strip, every inch of it. We still have to stop rocket launching from Gaza, and we have our people there, which is a pretty complicated issue. Part of it because many people look at the people there, of the Israelis there, as the cards in the hand of Yahya Sinwar. But they are not only cards; they are also is life security, and it might keep them. Some of them sure until the end. This is why we should close the Egyptian border. And by the way, looking very carefully if some of them are not already in Sinai. And doing that, we will have to take care of the people who will stay in Gaza. Actually, nobody wants them. And all the people who are telling to us, you have to be more human, etc. Where have you been? For example, with the Druze in the southern part of Syria, Jabal Druze, Reda, etc. Where have you been with the Kurds in the northern part of Syria, etc. But we are going to do everything about it, and in the same time, I just continue what Khaled, our friend, just said. It's not enough to control the food. It's and water, etc. It's their education, for example, because we are not going to tell the people in Gaza which kind of life they have to live, but we can't agree with educating a new generation of terrorists. So we'll have to deal with all this stuff, and we have the Northern Arena that we didn't talk about it right now, and other places, but it all starts with eliminating the Hamas in Gaza Strip.
What are your final observations, Richard?
On that point about education, etc., I think clearly Israel's not going to be able to influence or control education in inside Gaza any more than it will be able to in Judea and Samaria. But it has to be addressed. And of course, getting rid of UNRWA or not reforming UNRWA, but getting rid of it and getting a much more acceptable organization in place is a key part of it. But because of course, UNRWA schools are among the most guilty for radicalizing Gazan children. But I think, I don't know how realistic that is, but both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have great expertise in de-radicalization. So if they can be persuaded to be brought into this process, that would be, I think, a major advantage. Whether it's realistic, I don't know. And the second thing, just to end my comments on a note of some optimism, at least, I think we've heard a range of differing views from the United States, and the only country that really matters, I think, in this, maybe Egypt does, as you said, it's important, but the only country that really does matter in this is the United States in this war. And I believe the US has been very, very supportive so far, probably unexpectedly supportive, and have basically given Israel a free hand. I don't think that they've made any serious attempt to restrain Israel from what they know Israel needs to do. But that's a different thing from what they're saying publicly. And some of these comments, like Israel must minimize civilian casualties, Israel must observe the laws of war. Of course, they know Israel's doing that. But the Prime Minister, the President of the US and the Prime Minister of Britain and other countries are saying this because they have to mollify the anti-Israel elements in their own electorates. So they're talking in a way from both sides of their mouth. But I think ultimately, they are right now, they have so far been right behind Israel, and just hope that continues for the rest of the campaign.
The real question is whether it's time for people to take a principled moral stand and say they know very well that Israel not only adheres to international law, but was one of the pioneers in framing international law in wartime. As a matter of fact, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is just about to come out under the guidance and authorship of Ambassador Alan Baker, who was the former very highly esteemed legal advisor to Israel's foreign ministry, a book, a policy book called Israel Under Fire, the rights and requirements of democracies to maintain international law under fire. And this should serve as a strategic, a legal, and a moral example for other democracies. Having, now saying that, I think it is time for Western leaders to step up to the naysayers and say, get with the program. The Israelis are a leading example in the international community, and not to try to mollify them from a negative standpoint.
I could not agree more, but let's not forget these are politicians. And there is a danger, there's real danger to what I described of basically saying Israel, I've told the Prime Minister of Israel, he must adhere to the laws of war, he must minimize civilian casualties. The danger is not to Israel, the danger is to the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, because when the President or the Prime Minister say that, what they're saying is Israel is not adhering to the laws of war. And that inflames anti-Jewish feeling on the streets of the US, Europe, and other countries. And I think that's something they should pay very close attention to. The final point, though, is in Ukraine, certainly the British government, I can't speak for other governments, the British government had a very, very effective information campaign to persuade the British people that the sacrifices they were making, and they made significant sacrifices for Ukraine, both economically and in terms of military support, were necessary. They had a massive information campaign, very effective. They need to be doing that with their ally Israel. They don't need to necessarily be propagandists for Israel, but they should be making sure that the truth about what's happening in this war comes out to their people, because they have a responsibility not to inflame anti-Semitic hatred in their countries.
No, a good piece of advice, as you continue to give us good pieces of advice, Colonel Kemp, for the many years that you have taken your own very courageous moral stand and have advocated on behalf of Israel's moral clarity and intention in the United Nations and in other international organizations, for which the entire Jewish people in Israel and around the world owe you a great debt of thanks. Major General Uzi Dayan, thank you ever so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and experience with us, and we'll look forward to working together with you on the October 7th and Israel's survivable borders, defensible borders for Israel. We look forward to seeing you here very soon for that and other projects.
Thank you very much, and thank very much, Khaled and Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Uzi. And thank you to our very loyal participants on this program. I scrolled down the list, and these are one of the most highly educated participants and viewers of podcasts anywhere. They've been with us loyally for so many weeks, and we deeply appreciate it. And we have a wonderful show for you scheduled for tomorrow. So in the meantime, from Jerusalem, stay safe, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. God bless.